When I write about these kind of politics, one of my fears is that ordinary people will look at it and it will just reinforce their feelings of not liking politics and put them off. Whereas I see it should be exactly the opposite, that the reason why we look into these things, apart from holding the politicians accountable, is that people can learn how it works, and in a sense that's the greatest defence against them. And that's my belief, that if people are literate, if they understand the kind of tactics that are used against them, if they know what's going on when a politician doesn't answer the question or seems to just repeat lines like hard-working New Zealanders over and over again, if they know what's going on there, then that's actually the best way that it can not have an effect on them, and that when the whole society can survive those kind of tactics. And so that's where I want to start, is to look at that subject of literacy. What are the things that we should notice in this? Now, the first one that I think is pretty clear in the film is about repeating of lines. This is not what a normal person does. This is where politicians are taught to get a small number of statements. They've been chosen, in effect, to treat the public as dumb, and that the idea is that by repetition saying hard-working New Zealanders deserve a tax cut enough times, that will drill its way into people's heads. And I would say the first thing to think about that is to recognise what's happening, to think this is not normal behaviour. This has been organised and scripted and insisted upon as what they call message discipline by the spin doctors around the politicians, and we should treat it with the contempt it deserves. We shouldn't just let it wash over us and have us in the end thinking, oh well, us hard-working New Zealanders really do deserve a tax cut. So that would be the first thing I would look at. The next thing I would consider is understanding the style of politics that they run. Because we all optimistically imagine that politicians are going to try to express what they believe in and try to persuade us of what they believe in. But what you see when you watch some sorts of politicians is that they're not doing what we would do. They're not actually talking about policies at all. They're not engaging in their vision for the future. They don't actually see that as part of their role at all. It's sort of a policy-free zone. And where they do have talk about policies are tactics. They're ways to attack people, to ridicule people, to outmaneuver people, but they're not the development of something to try to do their best for the country according to their view of the world. And so what we need to recognise here is that, again, as part of our literacy, is that the conduct of politics is often a tactical process of attack politics. That's what they call it inside attack politics, fighting people, calling people names, trying to drag them down, trying to make them look stupid. It's not the business of forming policy that we might imagine. And when you understand this concept of negative politics or attack politics, you can see it going on. You can see it in Parliament. You understand that's what they're saying in that radio interview and that TV interview. They're not addressing the question at all. They're just trying to wear down their opponents by tricky or humorous or repetitive attacks on them on this or that subject, which have probably got nothing to do with what the policies are and what's best for the country. The final thing which I think in terms of literacy we should be really conscious of is what goes on at election time, because that's when the politics is most acute. And that was where, ironically, a party like the National Party and the Hollow Men least wants to talk about policy. It's this paradox. You'd think that's when they were presenting their policies, but actually policy is a problem to them. And it's a problem to them because lots of what they want to do once they're in government is not what the public would like them to be saying and doing. And so this game begins, and we should understand, if we understand the steps of this, again we can see through it and we know what's going on. The first thing is the huge effort goes into just not talking about things, not communicating, not putting forward policy. And they're aided and abetted in this by the journalists not asking them questions. And they kind of rely on this. In other words, if there's a difficult issue and it doesn't suit them to discuss it, they simply don't discuss it. And unless somebody makes it their business to challenge them, a journalist, an interest group or other politicians, they get away without discussing it at all. So that's the hidden policies. The next thing they're trying to do is to obscure policies, is to use language which softens and dulls it and sort of takes away our consciousness of what they're talking about. A classic case of this would be education at the moment. Rather than saying we want to gradually privatise education and move resources from public education to private education, they use the word choice. They talk about we need more choice in education, and parents deserve more choice, and parents deserve quality, which all sound good, but they don't tell you what they're going to do, because what that means is it means choice for them. That's the code word that means private education, more resources into private education, rich parents being able to do more for their kids. And so that's the next kind of thing you get in an election campaign, is where they're going to say anything. You have to look through the cryptic language and basically think for yourself, because you're not going to get it in a straight way. The third category of policies, which we should all look out for because they happen every election, and the National Party has just been through it at the time we're recording this for approach the 2008 election, is what's called inoculations. That's their internal language for this. They never say that in public. They also call it swallowing dead rats. And these are the policies which they don't believe in, and they really wish they didn't have to adopt, but they know that they haven't been able to hide them or obscure them, and they're going to get hammered during the election campaign. This is things like in New Zealand, it's been the nuclear-free policy, it's been privatisation, issues like that which they know are going to be unpopular with the public. And so what they do is they swallow their dead rats. You can see it about 9 months or 12 months before the election. Suddenly the party which has got unpopular policies will switch its position. They'll do quick little U-turns on them, and they'll put those off the agenda so they can't be attacked about them. Now, someone watching might think, well, good on them, they're responding to the public about this. Look, they've become quite reasonable on these policies, but you have to understand what's going on. The only reason that they're inoculating them is because they can't get away with hiding them and obscuring them, and they know they're unpopular. And a normal person would think, well, this suggests a pretty moderate, reasonable party coming up here, and they're concerned about things like a nuclear-free policy or the environment. We shouldn't be tricked by that. This is not an indication of a direction. It is simply a cynical closing down of policies that don't suit them. The final element of election policies, which we should all have our eyes wide open to, is the populist policies which they choose to put out there and to hammer and to repeat and repeat and repeat in their lines to the country. Now the thing about these is, the thing which is really contemptible about these, is that often they're policies that they don't even believe in. I saw this in the Holy Men, that they were promoting tax policies which the individuals didn't believe in. They saw it as a necessary, manipulative way of winning votes, not what they'd gone into politics to achieve. And so a few populist policies, it might be race relations, or it might be tax, or an issue like that with a National Party kind of party, serve two functions. One, they appear to fill the policy vacuum. They make it look like they've got policies when in fact they're not talking about most things. And people who join in the discussion about tax cuts or whatever it is are unwittingly joining and not talking about all the other things which are probably more important. But the other thing is that they have to have some material. They have to have a simple populist thing. And so by flogging it and flogging it, their aim is that they will be able to define the election that way and have people not to think about the rest of the things that matter in their lives and shape their futures, and that they care about the rest of the time. And so in all those ways, this is not my interpretation of what they do. This is what the strategists sit around and decide, how can we hide this? How can we inoculate this? Which populist policies will we use to get ourselves over the line and look like we've got a policy manifesto here? That's how they think about it. But if we understand those things, we see them for what they are, we can dismiss them when they're ridiculous, we can ignore them when they're not to the point, and we can make sure that we're not just kind of the dumb voters that they want us to be. One of the things that's really striking when you watch the spin doctors and the political operators up close is their complete contempt for the news media. They know that the news media, because of certain characteristics, is a pushover. When they go to see the parliamentary journalists, they call it feeding the chooks, because they find it so easy. And so it's good for us to understand the characteristics of journalism, which make it so susceptible to spinning and to manipulation, and seeing how it could be different, and what journalists themselves should be committing to do to make it better. Now, the first characteristic of journalism, which anyone who watches the news will know, is it's reactive. Journalists aren't going out and thinking, what's the most important issue? What will I go and find out about? I know, I really, really must go and question so-and-so about such and such. No, practically every item of news that comes out in the day is something which someone's put there. It's the press releases arrived, the press conference was organised, the event was held, and that means that the power has shifted from the journalists to the people who make the news, the people who put out the press releases in the minister's office and the PR companies and the leader of the opposition's press officer, the people who are putting the stuff to journalists. Second thing is, there's a high reliance on quotation in our journalism. That is, the way you get a story right is somebody said. Somebody said that crime is out of control in New Zealand and we have to take urgent measures. Now, that story is correct because somebody did say that, but it doesn't mean the person was correct. They might be saying crime's out of control because it suits them to emphasise that policy for some reason for themselves, or to de-emphasise something else they're doing. And so the next thing that journalists should be thinking about is who is telling the truth. That it's not enough to just be faithful conduits for other people's spin. The journalists themselves should be trying to decide whether or not they're just being told a lie. And if they are, they should do something about it. And the thing they should most often do about it is the thing that people sitting and watching the news or reading it, I know, because I hear them say it, are often crying out for those people to do, which is to just ask the right question. And this is something which in a realm of kind of reactive and quotation-based journalism, the journalists almost seem to forget, which is the journalist has an amazing power. And that power is the power to ask questions. Now, in many situations, what a journalist does with a politician is they walk up to them and they hold the tape recorder out and they say, could you please give me your comment on blah, blah, blah that just happened? And what that actually means is, please give me your 2 sentences of prepared spin, which if you say them in nice, neat little packages, I can slot into a story, and you may as well not have had a journalist because it's just been straight from the spin doctor to the public. But in that way, the journalist has abdicated their responsibility and they've given up their greatest power, which is they can ask a follow-up question. They can say, hang on a moment, I thought that you said this other time, and how can you back that up? And surely that's inconsistent with such and such, and all those other questions which the intelligent public is thinking, but the journalists so rarely seem to ask. So that's this next wonderful thing that journalists can do. The final thing is that journalists, even the good ones, are quite good at sort of fighting in the moment, going, hang on a moment, and trying to maybe notice what's going on, but they often don't notice the big picture, and that's where the experienced political operators doing their work, that's where the holy men, the things that is going on in the film and the book, are really operating. They may not get today's press release in, they mightn't get the exact quote they want in the newspaper, but they're aiming for something much bigger than that. They're aiming to frame the issue. And journalists are quite attentive to what the quote is and whether someone might be telling the truth or not on this day, but they seem to be almost blind to whose framing they are using. Framing means something like, this election is about tax, but that's not a fact. There's no truth or reality in that except to the extent that people believe it. And if the journalists buy into someone's view that this election is about tax or whatever the subject is, then the media manipulators who were trying to frame the issue in that way have won.